We get the return of a legend, the beef between the Deep and Noir reaches a boiling point, and Homelander finally becomes a god with the help of his father. Welcome back everybody, we are talking about the 5th and final season of The Boys, and today we are breaking down episode 6. We'll be discussing all the major details, including Sage's betrayal and now working with the boys, and no longer working at Vought, and of course, what will the boys do after what happens to Homelander at the end of this episode. Before we begin, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for all things The Boys as we continue our weekly coverage of each new episode all season long. There is so much to cover in this week's episode, so let's hope this goes better than Sage's plans. Let's break it all down, full spoilers ahead. We kick things off with a legendary return, quite literally. After being MIA since season 3, old Hollywood sex addict Legend is finally back. But not quite as we remember, as he's now working at a VMC movie theater under the fake name Chet. Legend is caught by surprise by MM, who isn't here for a matinee. Instead, he's on a mission as the boys are desperate to track down Bombsite. And who better not to ask than Legend, because let's not forget he ran Vought's hero department for decades, knowing all the dirty secrets and secret identities. As they head into a screening room, this is where the episode to me had the funniest joke, the most meta moment of the episode for me, as it's here we get the parody of the Nicole Kidman AMC ad, completed with the dramatic lighting, the inspirational voiceover, the free popcorn buckets, but this time around it's the VMC version with Firecracker instead of Nicole Kidman. Now back to the serious stuff though. Legend hesitates to give MM any information after their last encounter, but he changes his mind after learning that Homelander knows about the V1 and he's actively looking for it.
My point is, I'm full of shit sandwich. Thank you very much.
But if that wasn't enough, MM in a true Butcher-esque fashion ups the ante by threatening to cut off Legend's balls as he eventually agrees to help. Meanwhile at Vought, Sister Sage is running point on the 35th V1 recreation trial with Homelander's supervision. Now unfortunately the current test subject dies in a very painful way, and this being another brutal reminder of Vought's and Homelander's disregard of human life. Now the Deep arrives and he learns of Firecracker's recent death being a result of her not being a full believer in Homelander, which continues his trend towards paranoia and how quickly he's weeding out anyone he perceives as disloyal. Homelander and Sage tasked the Deep with handling a pipeline oil situation in Alaska, this being a clear loyalty test for Deep because of his connections to the sea and of course its fishes.
You know, it's just the fish, they don't love pipelines. In fact, they kind of hate them.
Thought you were on the boat. So what's more important, Homelander or some fruit?
Homelander, of course.
The Deep agrees, of course, because he's always desperate for Homelander's approval, always willing to do anything to stay in his good graces. Now, based on her reveal plans to Ashley in the previous episode, we can clearly see that Sage is practically sabotaging these V1 trials. Now, honestly, I think deep down, Homelander has to have some sense that Sage can't truly be trusted, especially after some of the things she did last season, but I believe his hubris can't allow him to believe that someone would dare challenge him, but as we'll discuss later, he was wrong. Now sticking with Sage for a bit, her master plan takes another leap forward in a secret meeting with Ashley. Now as we saw last week, Sage presented Ashley with her apocalypse plan, which we learn here that drunk Ashley agreed. But it's a new day, and Ashley is clear-minded and she lets Sage know that she's unwilling to mind read Soldier Boy, but Ashley continuing to refuse Sage is like a fly refusing a spider. Sage had a backup plan for this exact situation because as she says throughout this episode, everyone's predictable as she knocks out regular Ashley and has Tumor Ashley do the actual job. Now, after a brief meeting with Soldier Boy, the tumor version of Ashley reads his mind and lets Sage know that they do have a lead. Him and Homelander have a lead on the V1, and they're also well aware of Bombsite having the last of it. And that Soldier Boy is thinking of helping Homelander and he's secretly proud of his son. Now, Sage claims that she saw this coming as well, and this isn't a discovery, it's just basically confirmation, as she calmly takes out her notebook and she's ready for the next phase. Now, this includes her cutting out her VOT tracking chip and officially severing her ties with them and the Seven and initiating phase 3. Meanwhile, with the boys, they decide to split into 2 different groups. Now, Frenchie has finally recreated the new virus, as Annie and Hughie are tasked with taking it to the Democratic Church and putting the virus into an air freshener. Once the freshener goes off, it appears that this new iteration can still kill all soups exposed to it, including Homelander, who is supposed to be in attendance. Now the others, now with the help of the legend, are headed to a soup retirement home. They're looking for a soup by the name of Golden Geisha, who was an ex-adult entertainment icon, but also, more importantly, the ex-girlfriend of Bombsight. As we know, they need his location, and she's their only lead. Now, things at the retirement home go south pretty fast, as Golden Geisha isn't willing to talk to them. Now outside, Butcher and MM decide to go with another option, which is a nighttime kidnapping. But this causes a rift, as a legend, who has a history with Geisha, is disgusted by their plan. Now, what's even more upsetting for the Legend is seeing how MM is agreeing with Butcher and his methods. Legend is realizing that MM is basically becoming the very thing he used to fight against, as he bails on the boys. It's now nighttime, and the boys almost fail to take out Golden Geisha twice. First, they accidentally wake her up as she puts her shields up, but luckily MM has already spiked her IV with a sedative, knocking her out. But as they're wheeling her out, they get cornered by the geriatric soups. We got a guy using his saggy balls as a weapon. We have a soup named Hot Flash with literal flame hands. And then we have an old white man with an axe. The boys take them out pretty quickly without killing them, which is something Kimiko didn't want Butcher to do, but the mission ends up being a bust. Back at their hideout, Geisha reveals that she hasn't spoken to Bombsight in years, which sends the boys back to square one. Or are they? Because sitting in their hideout is Sister Sage. She explains how she tracked them down and claims she wants to help stop Homelander from getting his hands on the rest of the V1. She shares that she's got a plan currently in the works to help find Bombsight, and despite every red flag in the book, the boys again are desperate as they agree to let the smartest person in the world join their team. Now let's switch gears for a second and talk about the subplots going on in this episode. First, Noir sees Deep's post about the pipeline and he decides that it's time for payback. Meanwhile, on the way to the church, Hughie and Annie pull over to look at the clouds together, and Annie makes it seem like this will be their last time doing little stuff like this in the future. The discussion about Hughie's hopeful optimism comes up as this whole scene plays into a larger part that ties into what's going on with Kimiko and Frenchie, which we'll discuss a little bit later.
Hearing my dad's voice in my head. But then I finally understood what he meant. Because the only thing I had left was hope.
Now, before moving on, we talked about this in some previous breakdowns, but it's pretty obvious at this point that the show's going to either go 2 routes when it comes to Annie and Hughie. Option 1 is Annie dies, which honestly I don't see that happening, and if she were to die, it will be because she's protecting Hughie, or, which I think will be the actual option, they're both going to live happily ever after. And when it comes to Hughie, I said this a couple weeks ago, I don't see him dying, nor do I see both of them dying by the end. So again, I think the show is making it a little bit too obvious that both of these characters will most likely end up living. Now later that night, now at the church, Annie and Hughie find out that Firecracker died, and Annie actually feels bad for her.
You'd think I'd feel relieved, but I just feel sad. I mean, she's a human being.
Maybe that's why Homelander killed her.
Now, before they found her dead body, there was a brief mention about how Homelander's collecting most of the soups with psychic abilities, and one of them, as you notice here, is Kate from Gen V. So why exactly is Homelander collecting them? Is it to push his agenda, to trick the world into them thinking that he's a new guy? Because obviously if they have their abilities to control people's mind, they can make people think that, again, Homelander is actually their god. But I guess we'll have to find out to see why he is collecting all these particular psychics, and that would explain why we might see a Kate or Marie or Jordan or Sam in next week's episode or the finale, because again, they're going to probably want to save some of the members that are a part of the Gen V crew. Now, while planting the air freshener with the virus inside, Annie gets confronted by Old Father. Old Father and Annie briefly talk about their past before he became this full-blown Homelander believer and supporter. He confesses that after not being able to get his or other people's prayers answered by God, his faith began to fade. Once Homelander started listening to Old Father and the audience of his church grew larger, he started to fully believe that Homelander was his one true God. Now, of course, they start fighting, and it was honestly a one-sided fight, and thank goodness Hughie was there because I think Annie would have died because Old Father's sonic screams nearly took her out. But like I said, we see Hughie steps in and he threatens to release the virus. Now he bluffs saying that Annie already took the antidote as Old Father lets them walk away out of fear. Now I would assume that Hughie took the virus with them and he was supposed to obviously plant that in the air freshener, so their mission was kind of pointless. Meanwhile, the Deep's pipeline mission was initially a success for Vought, but ended up becoming a massacre of the ocean. After a pipeline incident, billions of fishes were killed, and because the Deep can talk to them, he knows they died knowing that he betrayed them, as his connection to the sea seems to be shattered. But it gets worse as Deep finds out that Black Noir 2 was actually the one who sabotaged the pipeline, and he was the one that was responsible for killing all those fish, as this was his revenge for what the Deep did to killing Adam in last week's episode. The Deep finally snaps as he strangles Noir and stabs him through the throat with his own knife, making this the second time Noir has died at the hands of a member of the Seven. If I'm being 100% honest with you all, I was hoping for a more impactful ending for Noir and the Deep to have like this long-winded fight, this like really passionate, brutal fight, but unfortunately it was kind of underwhelming to see how all this kind of played out between the two, because I was also hoping that Sage was going to be involved, because obviously that was a beef, that was a love triangle from last season, but either way, putting my underwhelmness aside, R.I.P. to Justin, aka Black Noir 2. But going back to the Deep and this problem that he now has on his hands, what will the Deep do? Like, how will he explain the death of a member of a Seven to Homelander without having permission to do that, on top of the fact that he also lost a connection with the sea? Now, I think we all feel pretty confident that Annie will be the one that ultimately kills the Deep based on their history, obviously, and based on what he did to her in season 1. But I'm starting to wonder if he'll die at the hands of something else. And what I mean by something else, I'm referring to the sea and the sea creatures. And again, knowing that he was involved with the pipeline, maybe we get a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. Maybe we'll see a fight between the Deep and Annie and things aren't maybe going on Annie's side, and maybe a shark comes out of the water and bites his leg off, and it's like a combination of like Annie gets the final blow, but also a sea creature helps out in the process, which is like them getting their payback, and Annie gets their payback at the same time. So again, if the Deep were to die, which I do think he will die, it'll be at the hands of a creature from the sea, but also Annie giving the final blow. Now back to Sage's plan to get Soldier Boy to turn on Homelander, it's in full effect. Now Homelander and Soldier Boy go to where crime analytics suggest that they can find a bomb site, and it takes them to some random empty house. Inside, they find an open laptop which plays a video of the last time Homelander and Stormfront were engaging in a sexual activity, and we see Soldier Boy gets upset. The way he saw it, Homelander basically kept her around as his own little personal sex doll after what happened to her with Ryan, as Soldier Boy punches Homelander, which leads him to telling Soldier Boy that he loves Stormfront as he did. Now Soldier Boy admits his love to Stormfront, and Homelander realizes that this was all set up by Sage, but as of now, Soldier Boy couldn't care less about this mission, and he leaves Homelander alone, but before he leaves, he tells him that he doesn't deserve to live forever with the V1. We'll talk about this later, but my goodness, the payoff with Soldier Boy and Stormfront or Clara better be good in Vought Rising, because goddammit, that's all they've been talking about for the last 4 weeks. Again, we'll talk about this discussion a little bit later, but man, they are just hitting this nail over the head because they just keep bringing this up. Stormfront, Clara, and Soldier Boy and their love and their mystery love. It has become so annoying. Now, this leads Homelander to finding the Legend at the theater after learning his involvement with the boys earlier in the day. He wants him to tell him everything about him helping the boys. Now, after already telling Homelander everything that he did with helping the boys, the Legend takes Homelander to their hideout spot. Obviously, they're not there, but Homelander sees Sage has left him a Taco Bell receipt to taunt him as he has a little mental breakdown about failing to fulfill his destiny given to him by his guardian angel. The legend witnessing Homelander having a mental breakdown makes him think that his life is on the line. In what he probably thinks are his final moments, he gets pretty brutally honest with Homelander. He shares a profound truth and honestly the core theme of this episode. That being the continuous cycle, the inevitability of all soups accepting that their time on top as number one eventually comes to an end. No matter who they are, even Homelander, Father Time is undefeated, death is inevitable, and it can't be avoided. Now, to illustrate his point, legend brings up Golden Geisha, a once shining star who, despite all her opportunities, is now been reduced to doing life alert commercials for Vought just to make ends meet. Now, ironically, Legend's honest, fearless speech and his sheer audacity to telling Homelander his truth and not fearing Homelander actually earns him his respect. As we've seen in the past, if Homelander can sense you're not afraid of him, he lets people go, and he does the same thing here as he lets Legend walk away. But the little tidbit about Goldie doing Vought Life Alert commercials, well, that sparked an idea in Homelander's mind as he quickly calls Crime Analytics, tasking them with tracking Goldie's Vought Life Alert necklace to find her current location, which by extension, he'll also find the boys. Meanwhile, back with the boys and Sage, we see Kimiko reveals how much of a fan she is of Geisha and how she doesn't want to hurt her. It's here that Geisha learns that the boys are actually looking for V1, which you think they would have brought that up earlier in the day, but she finds out that they're looking for the V1. She's so relieved because she doesn't want the V1, as she explains why her and Bombsight actually broke up. He wanted them to take the V1 together and he wanted to live with her forever. But Geisha refused. Living forever in her eyes was considered to be torture. Yes, they would live forever, but everyone they ever knew, everyone they ever loved, besides obviously them two, would eventually die, leaving them alone in this endless existence. Her tragic love story hits home for Kimiko as she confesses to Frenchie that she and Annie had a very similar discussion. They both agreed that if they got their hands on the V1, that they wouldn't take it. They don't want to live forever watching Frenchie and Hughie grow old and eventually dying. This moment explains Annie's earlier emotional scene with Hughie, looking at the clouds, cherishing these small moments because she's aware that one day that this could be the last time they do that, especially with the looming threat of the virus. Again, another example of the episode's main theme of touching on the idea of accepting death. Now, on the other side of the room, we have this conversation between MM and Sage talking about how they're both handling being a part of mass murder. Now, while Sage seems cold and calculating about what her plans are about going to her bunker and having this apocalypse go down, there's this flicker of doubt and a moral struggle going on with MM throughout this episode, and especially in this scene here, which suggests that he's questioning the extreme measures he's taken recently and being in line with Butcher with how they acted with using the virus. Now, it's been a pretty wild ride with MM this season regarding where his moral compass is. Remember at the start of this season, we saw MM saving Countess Crow from being exposed from the virus, but shortly after learning about Soldier Boy's immortality, he went full-blown IDGAF. So honestly, I'm not entirely sure on what side of the fence he'll lie on by the season's end, but I have a feeling that he's going to probably turn on Butcher and decide to not release the virus and decide to not kill all soups, because based on this episode and also again, his ups and downs this season is starting to lean towards like he's going to probably go against the idea of killing a bunch of soups and saving lives instead. Now, just as the emotional weight of mortality settles on everyone, we finally get to meet Bombsight in person. As he arrives flying in, ready to save his old girlfriend. Bombsight tries again to convince Goldie to take in the V1, but she still refuses, but she tells him that they've wasted so much time apart and she wants to spend whatever time they have left together. Bombsight refuses to give it up to V1, and a fight happens between him and the boys, and he clearly overpowers them because of the V1 in his system. Now, as he's about to knock out Kimiko, we see Goldie protects her by using her shields, and she doesn't want anyone else to be hurt because of her. Now, this distracts Bombsight, who gets punched by Soldier Boy, who was given their location by Sage, as this was all a part of her plan.
Have been at each other's throats for 80 years. It's their bone. Let the old dogs fight over it.
Now, those plans were to get Soldier Boy to turn on Homelander with that Stormfront video, then to have him fight Bombsight to take the V1 from him and destroy it before Homelander could use it. But, as we're about to see, those plans don't entirely work out as planned. Now we watch a Soldier Boy and Bombsight fight back and forth as Bombsight takes flight with Soldier Boy hanging onto his feet as they enter into an empty field. Now as we come to the end of this episode, Soldier Boy is about to kill Bombsight, but he doesn't after he begs and pleads for him to stop. They have a conversation about their past. Again, Vought Rising has been all over this season, but they have a conversation about their past and how they used to be on the same super team and how Bombsight was basically jealous of how Soldier Boy was treated and how him and Clara, aka Stormfront, loved each other and how they were supposed to be together forever. Now, Soldier Boy can see just how important it is for Bombsight to be with Goldie, and Goldie's basically his version of Stormfront, but unlike whatever happened between him and Stormfront, he sees this as a chance as redemption. He offers Bombsight a deal. He'll strip Bombsight of his immortality and he'll remove his powers as well. No more V1, just a regular man, as Bombsight agrees to take this deal and he'll finally be free. Now, just as Soldier Boy is done depowering Bombsight, who's happy that his powers are gone, he could bleed for the first time, in comes Homelander to get his V1. Now, before we break down this final moment, let's discuss this new lore that's just been added to Soldier Boy. Now, we already knew that he had the ability to depowering soups because of his radiation output, which is capable of burning Compound V from soups' bloodstreams, which effectively kills them, or in most cases, just strips them away of their abilities. But now we just found out that he can also remove V1 as well, which we'll circle back to here in a bit. Now, Bombsight runs out to go with Geisha as the boys watch from afar. Now, Sage, as she's been saying all episode long, that people are predictable, she's fully confident that Soldier Boy is about to destroy the last of the V1, but instead, we see Soldier Boy tells his son a story. He talks about how Stormfront would always tell him that he was the best of them and how important he was to the future of Soups, but he admits that she was wrong. He says that Stormfront hadn't met Homelander yet, and he hands him the V1, shocking the boys as well as Sage. Soldier Boy says that Stormfront would have wanted this for Homelander, as we watch Homelander burns a hole in his own arm and takes the V1 and lets out a laser blast into the sky after feeling the effects of the V1 as Butcher tells the boys to run. So let's talk about a few things about this ending. Now, I'm to assume that this was the last we saw of Bombsight and Goldie, at least in the current times. But we know we'll probably see them again in Vought Rising, which again, I can't help but point out how much this season has basically become a commercial for that series by mentioning characters and what we can expect to see with Soldier Boy and Clara, aka Stormfront, almost every episode at this point, which again has become quite annoying. Now, next topic, or my next big question is, why did Soldier Boy change his mind? Why did he hand the V1 to Homelander? Clearly, the love he had for Stormfront, aka Clara, overpowered any hate or jealousy he had towards Homelander, and it was mentioned earlier after Ashley read his mind that Soldier Boy was actually proud of his son, wanting to be the best of them. So I think it kind of boils down to a little bit of control. Like, Soldier Boy is tired of being a pawn. By giving his son Homelander the V1, he's empowering his son to become the god that everyone fears. Obviously, the V1 has been kind of a symbol of corruption this season, and it turned soups into gods. And by giving it to Homelander, Soldier Boy has effectively removed any remaining ceilings on Homelander's potential. One more thing that I think is the reason why he did that is, and it's a little bit unearned if you ask me, but at the end of the day, Soldier Boy never got the approval that he wanted from his own father, but now he sees the opportunity to give his son more than he had, and more importantly, he wants to be a proud father and responsible for creating the most powerful soup to ever live. So what now? How or what can the boys do with Homelander basically now being impossible to kill, and he's got his dad on his side as well, and they're both basically gods? Well, at least on the bright side, they now have the world's smartest person on their side. So what ideas or plans has she maybe made for this very unlikely scenario? So to go back to us learning about Soldier Boy can remove V1 from soups, but he seems now to be fully on his son's side. The question is, can you replicate what the Russians did to Soldier Boy to giving him that ability? So is it possible that Sage can recreate their experiments done on Soldier Boy on some soup, or use one of the boys, use Butcher or use Kimiko to have that soup removing ability to taking the V1 from both Soldier Boy and Homelander? But then I wonder, if there is a soup that can do that, do they have to have V1 in their system as well? Either way, I've been saying this forever, but it seems that we'll finally get to see the most unhinged, most uncontrollable version of Homelander that we've ever seen before, as we only have 2 episodes left. And if I'm being honest, I am so glad that the V1, this plot line is over, and we can finally see Homelander at his most powerful state yet. Overall, though, I thought this episode was solid. It was an entertaining episode, but I can't help but to point out again how frustrating it's been to see this final season has been more focused and more concerned about using the last season as a backdoor pilot for Vought Rising. We've been talking about Bomb Sight and Stormfront and Soldier Boy's past more than the boys having actual meaningful scenes all this season. I also can't help but to get the feeling that we won't be seeing some of the supporting cast for the rest of the season as well. I doubt we'll be seeing any more of Zoe or Samir or Ryan or Stan, and I know there were some rumors about the behind the scenes issues with the actress who played Maeve, but I was secretly hoping that she was going to pop up, but that doesn't look like that's going to happen. Also, I would have thought that the Gen V crew would have popped up by now, have been more involved in the story, but apparently that isn't the case. So obviously we only have 2 options left. We're going to either see them next week or in the finale, or maybe they'll be in both of those episodes. But nonetheless, I'm shocked by how limited of a role they had this season, considering how important the boy storyline was to the first 2 seasons of Gen V. Look, I'll end by saying this. I think this has been a good season for the most part, but it hasn't been a good final season because I just feel like the stakes haven't felt dire enough, nor has it really felt like we're actually heading towards an ending that's going to have a good payoff, in my opinion. But again, we still have episodes 7 and 8, and those episodes might change my mind. With all that being said, this will conclude my breakdown of The Boys Season 5, Episode 6. I appreciate you all for watching or listening to this week's breakdown. If you all are watching this on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that like button. I would appreciate it. When you hit the like button, there's a hype button that pops up on YouTube, which spreads this video into new viewers. But also, speaking of new viewers, hit the share button, man. Share this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about The Boys just as much as we do. And last but not least, consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel today. Now, for my podcast listeners out there, whether that's on Apple or Spotify or wherever you all get your podcasts from, I appreciate my podcast listeners out there. Do me a favor, man. Let me know your thoughts on this episode in the comments below, but also consider following and subscribing to the podcast, and I would love it if you all can give me a 5-star review. Alrighty, y'all, we got 2 more episodes left before we wrap up The Boys, but before we get there, again, thank you all for watching this week's breakdown. I'll see you all next week for episode 7, and in the meantime, don't forget, you all are awesome, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.